I want to tell you something that will sound absurd at first. The men I worked with at Princeton, the most accomplished theoretical physicists of the 20th century, kept beautiful notebooks. They sat in lectures and copied equations with great care. They underlined important passages in books. They organized their notes by subject, by date, by importance. And most of them, despite all this discipline, never produced a single original idea in their entire careers. I kept almost no notes. My desk drawer at the Institute for Advanced Study held a few loose pieces of paper, mostly with calculations I had abandoned. My books had no underlines. When I was sitting in a lecture, I was usually drawing. Not the equations on the board, something else entirely. And the work I did in those years, you have heard of. I am Albert Einstein. And what I want to tell you in the next 25 minutes is why the most universal study habit ever invented is also the single greatest enemy of genuine thinking. Why almost everything you have been told about note-taking is wrong. Why it has been wrong for over 100 years, and what to do instead. The method I used was not invented by me. It was the natural way the human mind has always worked, before schools convinced us to stop using it. I just refused to stop. Let me begin by destroying the comfortable explanation, because until that explanation is dead, the method I am going to give you will sound like nonsense. The comfortable explanation is that note-taking is essentially a memory aid. You write things down so you do not forget them. The notes are a backup, a safety net, a record you can return to later. This sounds reasonable. It is also almost completely wrong. The brain does not work the way the explanation assumes it does, and the act of taking notes for the purpose of memory creates the exact opposite of what you are trying to achieve. When you sit in a lecture or read a book and write down what you are hearing or reading, your brain divides into two modes simultaneously. One mode is listening or reading. The other mode is transcribing. These two modes compete for attention. The transcribing mode wins almost every time because it has a clear, immediate mechanical task. Move the pen, capture the words, do not fall behind. The listening mode, which is supposed to be doing the actual work of understanding, becomes secondary. The result is that you have a notebook full of accurate transcription and a head full of nothing. You have offloaded the cognitive work to the page, and the page is a poor substitute for a mind. 3 weeks later, you cannot find the relevant section in your notes when you need it. And even if you could, the words on the page are dead. They were never alive in your brain in the first place. You wrote them down before they had a chance to become understanding. I want to tell you about my roommate at the Zurich Polytechnic, because he made this clearer to me than any textbook ever could. His name was Marcel. He was, by every official measure, a better student than me. His notebooks from our physics lectures were beautiful. Different colored inks for different categories. Underlines, double underlines, brackets around the important parts. He could open a notebook from 3 months earlier and find exactly what he needed within seconds. I, by contrast, took almost no notes during lectures. I would listen. Sometimes I would draw. Sometimes I would close my eyes. Marcel thought I was being lazy, and on one level he was right. I was being lazy in a specific way. I was refusing to do the work of transcription so that I could do a different kind of work instead. When the lecture ended, Marcel had a complete record of what had been said. I had nothing on paper, but I had something inside my head that he did not have. I had spent the entire hour wrestling with the ideas. When the professor said something I did not understand, I had stopped following along, gone back in my mind, and tried to figure out where the confusion came from. When the professor said something that contradicted what he had said earlier in the term, I had noticed it because I was not busy writing. When the professor described an experiment, I had imagined the experiment in my own mind, with my own variables, asking what would happen if I changed something. By exam time, Marcel had to study his notes intensely to remember the material. I rarely studied at all, because the material had already become part of how I thought during the lectures themselves. He would ask me how I prepared, and I would tell him I had prepared during class. He thought I was being smug. I was telling him exactly what had happened. The first wrong answer about note-taking is the explanation I just took apart, that notes are a memory aid. The second wrong answer is more sophisticated and harder to dislodge. It says that note-taking is not about memory, but about processing. The act of writing something down, even if you never look at the notes again, helps you understand it. You hear it, you process it through your hand and pen, and the physical act consolidates the learning. This is partially true and almost entirely misleading. There is some research suggesting that handwriting notes produces slightly better retention than typing them. But the effect is small, the studies are inconsistent, and they all measure the wrong thing. They measure recall of facts. They do not measure understanding, which is a completely different cognitive activity. Understanding is not built by capturing information. Understanding is built by struggling with information until it makes sense. The struggling is the work. The capturing is, at best, a side effect of the work, and at worst, a substitute for it. When you take notes, you are usually substituting. The capturing feels productive. The struggling feels uncomfortable. Most students choose the comfortable feeling and call it studying. I want to give you a number that should disturb you. Studies on lecture comprehension consistently show that students who take detailed notes during a lecture and students who simply listen attentively without notes perform almost identically on tests of basic factual recall. But on tests of deeper understanding, the kind that require applying concepts to new situations rather than reciting them, the listeners outperform the note-takers by a significant margin. The note-taking, which felt like extra effort, was actually preventing the deeper work the listeners were doing automatically. This is not because note-taking is inherently destructive. It is because the kind of note-taking that almost everyone does, the transcription kind, prevents the simultaneous mental work that understanding requires. There is a third wrong answer I need to address before I tell you what I actually did. This one is the most modern and the most seductive. It is the idea that the solution to bad note-taking is better note-taking, more elaborate systems. The Cornell method, the Zettelkasten method, the various digital tools with hyperlinks and tags and graph databases. If only your notes were better organized, the argument goes, you would think more clearly. I have looked at these systems. Many of them are clever. None of them solve the underlying problem, because the underlying problem is not organization. The underlying problem is that notes, no matter how well organized, are still a substitute for the work of thinking. A Zettelkasten with 10,000 interconnected nodes is still a graveyard of pre-digested ideas if the person who built it never wrestled with those ideas in real time. I have known several men who have built such systems. Their note collections are extraordinary. Their original output is almost non-existent. The system absorbed the time that should have been spent thinking. They optimized their preparation so thoroughly that they never got around to using it. So what did I do instead? Let me describe it precisely, because the negative version of this method is a trap. You cannot simply stop taking notes and expect to get my results. The absence of note-taking is not the method. The presence of a different activity is the method. When I sat in a lecture as a student, and later when I read a difficult paper or attended a conference, I did three things almost continuously. I want to walk through each of them because together they replace what most people are trying to do with notes. The first activity is what I call active prediction. As the speaker is talking or as I am reading, I am constantly running ahead of the words. I am asking, what is this person about to say? Where is this argument going? What is the next step? When I am right, the prediction confirms my model, and the information becomes integrated almost effortlessly. When I am wrong, I notice the gap between what I expected and what was said, and that gap becomes a flag for further thought. I do not write the gap down. I let it sit in my mind, where it can attract other thoughts to it. This is the same prediction mechanism I described in another video, the one about language learning. It is not a coincidence. The prediction mechanism is how the brain learns. Note-taking interferes with it because predicting and transcribing cannot happen at the same time. Choose one. The educational system trained you to choose transcription. I chose prediction. The second activity is what I call worked examples. When the professor describes a concept or proves a theorem, I am not writing down his proof. I am running my own version of the same idea inside my head. If he is showing how a force vector works, I am imagining a different physical situation that uses the same principle. If he is deriving an equation, I am asking whether the same result could be reached by a different path. The lecture becomes a series of prompts for my own mental experiments, not a stream of information to be captured. This is exhausting. By the end of a good lecture, I would be tired in a way that note-takers were not. They had transcribed for an hour. I had worked through a dozen variations of the material in real time. My fatigue was the evidence of actual learning. Their freshness was the evidence that they had not really engaged. The third activity is what I call selective inscription. I do write things down, but rarely, and never as transcription. When something genuinely surprises me, when I notice a contradiction, when a question forms that I cannot resolve in the moment, then I write. Just that one thing. A single sentence on a loose piece of paper. Sometimes a quick sketch. These notes are not a record of what I heard. They are a record of where my own thinking encountered something it could not handle. They are inscriptions of cognitive friction. The next time I have a quiet moment, I take that loose paper and sit with it. I work on the question. Sometimes I solve it. Sometimes I add a second piece of paper with a related thought. Over years, certain papers become very long, accumulating attempts, dead ends, breakthroughs. I want to tell you about a specific year that taught me how powerful this method can be. It was 1907. I was working at the patent office in Bern. I had been thinking on and off about a problem that had bothered me for several years, the problem of accelerating reference frames. Newton's mechanics handled them, but with an awkwardness that suggested something deeper was missing. I had no notes on this problem. I had a single piece of paper in my desk drawer with 3 lines on it. The lines were 3 different formulations of the same question, written at different times when the question had presented itself to me in different forms. One afternoon, I was walking home and watching a man fall from a scaffolding. He was uninjured, but the moment of his falling stayed with me. As he fell, what would he have felt? In his own frame of reference, with his bucket falling beside him, gravity would have momentarily disappeared. He would have felt weightless until he hit the ground. The bucket would have hung beside him, neither falling toward him nor away from him. I went home and added a 4th line to my piece of paper. The line was a reformulation of the question that had been bothering me for years, but in a form I had never written before. The reformulation was the seed of the equivalence principle. The equivalence principle became general relativity. General relativity changed our understanding of the universe. I want you to notice something about that story. The thinking did not happen on the paper. The paper was not a tool for thinking. The paper was a record of where my thinking had reached, so that the next time I returned to the problem, I would not have to retrace the same ground. The thinking happened in walks, in conversations, in moments of seeing things like the falling man. The paper was just a marker, like a flag planted on a mountain to show how high I had climbed. If I had been a diligent note-taker, the 4 lines would have been buried inside hundreds of pages of lecture transcriptions and reading summaries. I would never have found them when I needed them. The signal would have been drowned in noise. By keeping almost no notes, I made sure that every piece of paper in my drawer was a flag, not a record. Every flag pointed at something that mattered. I want to anticipate the objection that comes up here, because it is the objection that stops people from trying this method. You are thinking that this is fine for me, with my unusual mind, but ordinary people need the support of notes to keep up with complex material. That without the safety net of transcription, an average person would simply lose track of what was being said. This is wrong, and it is wrong in a specific way. The reason ordinary people feel they cannot keep up without notes is that they have never been taught to do the alternative work. Their attention has been trained for 15 or 20 years of schooling to externalize information immediately. They feel lost without notes because they have never tested whether they can hold material in active engagement instead. They have only tested the alternative for a few minutes at a time, in moments when they forgot a pen, and they have always experienced those moments as failure. If you spend 6 months deliberately practicing prediction, worked examples, and selective inscription instead of transcription, you would discover something that schools never told you. The brain is more capable than you have ever asked it to be. The reason it feels weak is that you have been treating it like a backup hard drive when it was designed to be a workshop. Treat it like a workshop and it will work like one. Now, I want to make this about you specifically, because abstract advice produces no change in behavior. You have right now, somewhere in your home or on your computer, an enormous archive of notes you have taken over the years. Lecture notes from school, notes from books, notes from professional development, notes from podcasts and videos. The volume of this archive is impressive. You probably feel some pride about it. It represents years of intellectual effort. I want you to perform a simple test. Pick one set of notes from at least 6 months ago. Open them. Read them. Then, without referring back to the notes, write down in your own words what the original material was about, what its core argument was, and how you would apply that argument to a current problem in your life. Most people, even people who consider themselves lifelong learners, will discover that they cannot do this. They have notes. They do not have understanding. The notes were a substitute for understanding, and now, years later, the substitute has decayed into nothing useful. You have been spending time on the wrong activity. The pride you feel about the archive is misplaced. The archive is not evidence that you learned. It is evidence that you tried to learn and used the wrong method. The same time spent on prediction, worked examples, and selective inscription would have produced something different. Not an archive, a way of thinking. The way of thinking would still be with you now, available to apply to anything. The archive is gathering dust because the archive was never the point. The fourth practice is the hardest, and the one most people will skip. It is the deliberate elimination of comprehensive notes. The next time you go to a lecture, a meeting, or a long article, deliberately do not take notes. Sit with your hands empty. Listen with full attention. Run your prediction mechanism. Generate worked examples. Notice your cognitive friction without writing it down. You will feel anxious. Your hand will want to reach for a pen. You will feel certain that you are missing important material. This anxiety is not a signal that you need notes. It is the withdrawal symptom of a habit. Your nervous system has been trained to feel safe when transcribing and unsafe when not. The training was wrong. You can untrain it, but only by sitting with the anxiety long enough for it to subside. After the lecture or meeting, before you do anything else, sit alone for 10 minutes. Reconstruct what was said in your own words, out loud if you can. Not the words of the speaker, the ideas in your own voice applied to your own situation. You will discover that you remember more than you thought, and what you remember is more useful than transcribed words ever were. The act of reconstruction is the encoding. The lecture provided the raw material. Your reconstruction made it yours. Here is what I want you to carry out of this. The note-taking habit was not invented to help you learn. It was invented to help institutions standardize learning so that what was taught in one classroom could be reproduced in another, so that students who had not been present could obtain the content secondhand, so that examiners could test recall against a fixed body of material. The habit served the institution. It did not serve you. You inherited a tool designed for someone else's purpose and were told it was for yours. The brain you have, the one your distant ancestors used to learn the world without writing, the one your great-grandparents used to apprentice in trades and absorb crafts, that brain works by engagement, prediction, and reconstruction. It does not work by transcription. The transcription habit suppresses your real learning mechanism and replaces it with a poor substitute. You have been operating intellectually with one hand tied behind your back, and you were told this was studying. What I have given you is not a productivity hack. It is a return. Return to how the human mind actually learns, before institutional needs convinced you to do something else. The first weeks of practicing it will feel uncomfortable, almost dangerous. By the third month, you will notice that your understanding of difficult material is sharper than it has ever been, and you cannot quite explain why. The reason is that you are finally using the equipment you were born with. The question I want to leave you with is specific. Think of the most recent lecture, podcast, or long article you consumed and took notes on. Right now, without looking at your notes, can you reconstruct its central argument and apply it to a current problem in your life? If you cannot, your notes were a substitute for the understanding you never built. The next thing you read, the next lecture you attend, what would happen if you tried it differently? Hands empty, mind active, full presence, nothing on paper until something genuinely surprises you. That question has a real answer, and the answer is where your real thinking begins.